started, so last call for food. Actually, that's not true, you can still get food. But if you haven't already, please sign in because we can send you an assessment afterwards to make sure that the training is formalized and is official. And also there are 2 handouts in between the sign-up sheets that Dr. Humphries will be referring to throughout her speech. And then there's a couple other NLG items that you can take home, take a look at. But anyway, thank you so much for coming out, and I realize it's late, so we really appreciate your time. Dr. Humphries will go into more depth about what legal observing is, so I just want to go ahead and introduce her. We're very, very fortunate to have her. Dr. Humphries is one of the leading scholars in this area. She's an analyst and a scholar activist who has served as a consultant on a variety of different legal, public administration, public health, as well as environmental initiatives in the U.S. and abroad. She is a senior legal observer and a legal observer trainer for the New York City chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, and her past work with NLG includes developing a legal observer's curriculum specifically aimed at improving cultural competency in interactions with demonstrators, Black communities, and law enforcement. She earned her PhD in public administration from the School of Policy Planning and Development at the University of Southern California. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology, a Master's in Public Health from UCLA, and a Gender Studies certificate. So, she is well qualified to speak on this area, and we are very grateful for your time. Please welcome Dr. Jill Humphries.
All right, so folks, let's just see who's here. So let's start from here. Introduce yourself. Tell me your name, your year in law school, and why you're here. What do you want to learn?
My name is Nicholas. I'm a 1L. I want to learn sort of everything about this because it's very intriguing. We see all these times these videos of these kinds of incidents occurring, and you wonder if I'm involved in that kind of thing. What can I do? How can I participate in this and intervene in a good way?
Well, we're here. Our photographers.
Sorry. So I'm Cameron, and I actually missed what else you wanted us to say because we were working out the camera.
What year, law school, and what would you like to learn?
So I am a 1L, and yeah, I'm just really interested in being able to, in sort of gaining skills so I can be a more useful, active observer of situations that are going on around me, and be more prepared to, document or pay attention in a way that's helpful.
I'm Courtney. I'm also a 1L. I think I wanted to be here and learn about legal observing because, I consider myself an activist, kind of, and I'm like, but what activism am I actually doing? I haven't actually done any protest or anything. It's this is a good way for me to balance my own personality with doing active activism.
I'm Katarina. I'm a 2L here at UVA. I actually hadn't even heard of this until recently, and I thought I really wanted to learn more about it, and I think it's a really interesting and productive way to engage with some of these issues.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm a 2L. And I'm interested to be here today because it's
just sat down.
I'm Joe. I'm a 2L. I wanted to do more of this last year, which 1L, at least in my life, did not allow me to, so I'm hoping to just get back into it this year.
I'm Stephanie. I'm a 3L. I did some legal observing 1L year, and it was really fun and really interesting, and I really liked. I felt like it was empowering the protesters to be more courageous with their statement paper making stuff.
I'm Susie. I'm also a 3L, and I see Steph's emails all the time about going to go be a legal observer, and I have not once taken you up on it, but hopefully with this training I will feel more.
I'm Tex. I'm a 3L, and I've been doing training before, but I just thought it'd be interesting. You retrain, especially for someone with some similar experience.
I'm Joanna. I'm a 2L. And I'm here because, similar to what everyone said, I want to be a more useful activist and have the tools to help empower protesters.
I'm Nellie. I'm a 2L as well. I've been active in civil rights, but not on the ground as much, and that's one thing.
I'm Sarah. I'm 1L. I guess I'm curious to kind of learn more what this is about, but probably not for doing it next year or 3L.
I'm Maggie. I'm 2L. Similar, I was actually at a bunch of protests this summer too, where I actually didn't see any NLG representatives, and so I think it's important to take advantage of this resource now so that we have a skill set kind of for the rest of post-law school.
I'm Angie. It's really important to me to be a part of the community that I'm in, and I think that this is kind of a special way to do that, and I just want to contribute, I guess, in that way, since I will be able to.
What year are you?
That's well, sorry.
Thank you.
I'm Aaron. I'm actually an interloper. I'm not a law school student. I'm here because the local chapter is showing up for racial justice advertised this event. Hopefully, it will be useful to me if I'm not a lawyer. I'm interested in police accountability and protest guidance.
Hi everyone, my name is Gina. I'm a 1L. And I've definitely seen legal observers in action, but I've never been one, so I want to get trained and hopefully pursue it in the near future.
I'm Amy. I'm a 1L, and I hadn't really heard of the term legal observer before, so I'm here to learn more about it.
Okay. And my two assistants.
I'm Elise. I'm a 2L, and NLG and speaking to Steph actually about legal observing is really what got me excited about joining NLG and coming to law school. So, I think it'd be great to receive official training from someone that's very experienced in this area.
I'm Keisha. I'm also a 2L. I actually went to your training last year at Disorientation at Georgetown, and I just thought it was so great and so important that we learn how we can empower people who are just demonstrating their rights to protest and ensure that their constitutional rights aren't infringed upon. And so after seeing your training, I wanted to how do you kind of replicate that here, so it would give our students an opportunity to see what it takes to be a legal observer.
Okay. Well, folks, thank you all for introducing yourselves. I am a educator, so I always think it's very important to recognize people's humanity and actually know who I'm speaking to, presenting to hence why I asked you all your names and give me a little bit about your background. And I'll just share very quickly so we can start just a little bit about my background. Yes, I'm a social scientist, but I initially, my training was actually in Southern Africa. At age 22, I signed a 3-year contract and went to go work in Southern Africa, specifically teaching high school, but I was also documenting at that time what's called what they call frontline aggression or violence towards the frontline states in Southern Africa by South Africa, because South Africa was not free. And so I was doing observation and documentation before I was formally trained. And I share that with you because Elise, is that correct, asked me when she was picking me up, did I first look at theory to inform me in terms of how I do this type of work, or did it come inductively from actually being in the field? I'm a practitioner, an activist. And so most of my work, theorizing, is informed by what I've observed, right, on the ground work. And that's pretty much, as those of us who, if you choose to become an LO, that you'll derive most of your understanding from being in the streets. You can read about it all you want, but until you're facing a police line and folk in Kevlar gear or in front of military-grade weapons pointed directly at you, all the theory in the world is not going to help you in terms of how do you actually deal with your emotions first, fear, right? And then to be able to do your job, which is to be able to observe any kind of interactions between, right, police and demonstrators. So I am part of the National Lawyers Guild New York chapter. I'm a member there. I've been a member for the past 11 years. I'm also, because I'm moving back home to Los Angeles, where I'm initially from, I'm also a chapter member with the Los Angeles chapter, so I have dual membership. I'm also a member of the National Conference of Black Lawyers. You may not have heard of them, but they are a parallel progressive radical organization of black attorneys that was founded around 1968, 1970s. I'm part of the New York chapter, and hopefully we will reinvigorate the Los Angeles chapter. I am also a member of the Law for Black Lives Network. I don't know if any of you attended the national convening they had, I think it's a year ago now, in New York City. So I'm also a network, a part of their leadership council for the Law for Black Lives. So let me share just a little bit very briefly about the New York chapter, right? So the New York chapter, I would say, in terms of around the country, I would actually say it's one of the most well-organized, has one of the most well-developed LO programs. And the script that I'm using and the PowerPoints, the framework or the content comes from the New York chapter. And I always want to give them their props for training me and being in the streets for 10, 11 years rolling with folk. What kind of professional skills and as you move on from law school, folks, and you have to get a job, right? Why is it, just leave it, that's fine. Why is it important? What can you gain, right, from being a legal observer? And I always think it's very important to share with students, particularly those of you who are about to start your professional career, understanding self-interest rightly understood, for those of you who've taken economics, right? So by becoming an LO, I'm going to share this with you. You're going to become part of a national network of attorneys that practice across every imaginable field, professional field you can think of. So just think professionally. If you're interested in this area of law, well, you're part of the family, right? Which means you can reach out because you're a fellow LO. You're part of this National Guild family, right? So also think of it as an opportunity, being part of the NLG, right? Being part of an LO in terms of being part of this ability to advance yourselves professionally. Something for me, because I'm not an attorney, even though I work with attorneys, I've been an expert witness on sexual asylum cases for African sexual asylum seekers here in the U.S. And of course, now I have been working with lawyers, specifically around lawyers who want a social scientist who can do a couple of things. One, talk about the way in which race, gender, and sexuality intersect, right? That may bias the way jurors, right, think about their clients or the way you present material, right? So I do that type of work with lawyers. But now I'm doing a different type of work. My PhD and almost all of my degrees, except for my BA in anthropology, have been applied degrees. So I literally help design mass defense systems. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what a mass defense system is. Being a legal observer is one component of mass defense system, but the other components are an attorney panel, right? Because you got to have someone to refer the arrestees to. So you have an attorney panel. You have those of us who are trained to LOs to be out in the field to actually document arrests or any kind of interaction between police, right? And then you have jail support, which is normally a network of other organizations that are out on the street or go visit jails, right, and or court appearances when individuals who are arrested, right, matriculate through the system. That's a mass defense system, right? So I literally travel around the country and help design these type of systems depending on the local politics, cultural, and degrees of human and social capital, right? Because of my background as a public administrator. So the other sort of skills development you can develop and cultivate by being an LO, of course, is, and they can be transferable to other professional areas, is your interpersonal skills, cognitive awareness. Cognitive awareness simply comes out of Buddhism, right? It means mindfulness. In other words, are you aware of how your actual cognitive process is? From the time you walked into the door, Did you become aware of who's in the room? How do you think about people? How do people look, and what does that trigger, right? So it's another way to have conversations about implicit bias and how that impacts decisions, right? How stereotypes and other ways in which we think about groups of people may impact our decisions, like when we're in the street LOing. And that's really important because, folks, this room is very diverse. This is reflective of the US. Just want to share that with you, right? But we've also been socialized to have stereotypes about whether or not women can hold leadership roles, right? Whether or not non-gender conforming males who might have more effeminate presentations, right, can hold, right, leadership roles. What types of forms of masculinity may be more approachable, be able to approach the police more, even, or not even. Maybe perhaps females who have a masculine form of femininity may not be able to approach police officers because it's non-gender conforming, and we know that there's a bias against the way in which people in authority may react towards that. So let's talk a little bit about the specifics of what we do in the field, which is what I love. Lecturing folks or speaking, and I want this to be, please, engage me, because I'm one of these kind of instructors that likes to interact with folk, right? I prefer to be in the field because it's just an adrenaline rush. And I tend to also move around a lot. Let's see. So, the green hats, folks, visibility. I'm sure for those of you who've been in the street or seen videos or something like that on the news, you see the green hat, right? This is our marker. This is internationally known, right? The National Lawyers Guild Legal Observer Corps, right, out there in the streets. Or when it's cold, in the streets of New York City or other parts, right, we get to wear our little beanies. I'm waiting for my jacket, my fluorescent jacket, right? So we're known for our green hats, and what we ask is folks to only wear your green hats when you're actually in the field. The reason why, folks, is that we don't want to lose our legitimacy. People just walking around like with a green hat, right, in the street. Lose your legitimacy and authority in terms of the particular role that you're playing. So respect the green hat, right? Let's see, what else? There's something else I need to share, right, before we even start. Okay, so very quickly, the 3 learning objectives, go back to my teaching, 3 learning objectives that I hope that you all come out of this with is, 1, you're going to learn skills on the tactics of LOs, how we move in the street, right, what we do, how we observe police. You're going to learn police tactics, what the police do to command and control you all, right? And then the third sort of skill set is understanding how to apply, right, or the interaction between your skill set as an LO, right, the police tactics, and how to actually apply it in the street. Got to put that in there. The other set of important issues is that, and I should just ask this, you guys are all law students, so I'm sure you've all studied or read the Constitution, hopefully before you got to law school, right? So democracies, of which we are still, I believe, an emerging democracy, what do you think are the important roles of having a set of second eyes observing things? LOs play what kind of function and role in democracies? Or theoretically, LOs are supposed to? What branch? Yes?
I was going to say they help us to protect our First Amendment rights.
Right. Protect our First Amendment rights. What else?
I was just going to say, in a legal way, they kind of act as the fourth estate, the way that the press acts in democracies as well.
Okay. What was that term you used? What of state?
The fourth estate.
Tell me about that. I've never heard that before.
Maybe this is specific to French history, but...
That's good. That is good.
But after, like, the revolutionary era in France, like, there's this understanding of the, well, I guess during and after, there's this understanding of the press as a very specific entity within the political structure of the country. And it seems like what the LOs are trying to do is be that on the legal side.
Okay. So basically accountability, protect our First Amendment rights, and what would perhaps be the maybe one of the last. We are, and I'll give the description first, and you guys tell me what you think it is. So the description is this. I heard a lot of you all say that, well, I consider myself an activist, right? 2. But in this particular role, those activist leanings are tempered or from a qualitative perspective, we call it, what do you call it? I'll say tempered, right? My activist leanings, because what is it that in the event that I have to come in court and one of you all are a judge, right, and I'm an LO and I'm testifying, would the judge and the jury, right, want to see me up there talking about, perhaps a biased perspective leaning towards the demonstrators? They would expect me to possibly be what? Say it louder. Neutral, right? So my understanding of perhaps of the LO role is that in democracies or emerging democracies, we want to be, it's an accountability mechanism to protect our First Amendment rights. And part of that is that, folks, we want to be perceived as neutral. Now, whether we are neutral or not, we all have politics, is one thing. But at least when we are playing this role as LOs, it's important that you all particularly remember that you're being watched by police or law enforcement or other security forces out there, but you're also being watched by protesters. And so to the best of your ability, you want to maintain some type of neutral, right, neutrality in that process, because at the end of the day is, if you have to testify or go to court, right, that's what people are going to expect, right? And you want to be able to kind of uphold that standard. The last sort of historical, well, that sort of theory, legal theory, constitutional theory, democracy theory, the last sort of very important historical piece, and I was talking to your dean about, is that the National Lawyers Guild has a long history, right, paralleling another law organization that predates the origin of the Guild. The Guild was founded in 1937. The National Bar Association, which is the oldest black bar association, was established in 1924 because of the exclusion, right, exclusionary practices of black attorneys not being able to be a part of the American Bar Association. So these founding members of the Black Bar Association came to the founding of the National Lawyers Guild in 1937. There was 12 African-American men. One of them, if I remember correctly, was Charles Hamilton Houston, right? And Thurgood Marshall also was a member of the NLG. So there's been a long parallel history. I just want to share this with you, of African-Americans who have just because of the particular situated position we have in the US, right, and globally, have been struggling and fighting around human rights, right, and specifically dealing with police misconduct and brutality or violence or state-sanctioned violence towards African-American communities or black communities. It's important to know this history because contemporarily, folks, number one, that history submerged. The dean and I, who I just found out is a legal historian, writes on this. We actually were having a conversation about this topic. And it needs to be reinvigorated and discussed in the Guild precisely so that we develop a more diverse, the Guild needs to become more diverse, but also in its practice, but also the way it thinks about its narrative in terms of when they're trying to interact with black communities or other communities, right, that are different than their dominant population that makes up the body of the Guild. So y'all need to do some homework. All right, so let's get into the nuts and bolts. Right, so who are legal observers, folks? In the context of New York City, but your chapter may be different because we have someone who is not an attorney, and I am not an attorney, nor am I a paralegal. In New York City, the categories that we've chosen who can be certified as an LO are lawyers, law students, and legal workers, right? But in, I think, Los Angeles, we just broadened the category and said community members. And particularly, folks, if you're working with African-American communities or Asian communities or Latino communities, folks, because of the small percentage of attorneys in general, right, or small percentage of folk who are matriculating through law school from those populations, you're going to get a much smaller percentage of individuals who may fit these quote-unquote strict categories. So if we're really talking about providing this type of support to communities that are most impacted by police, right, violence, you've got to broaden these categories, right? So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about how you all actually think about who could be an LO, right? It's a skill set. I'm a qualitative researcher. I can teach any of you all how to observe and document, right? And how to present in a court of law without being a lawyer, law student, or legal worker. What's the other part of our training or who can be a legal observer, right? So folks, once again, the New York chapter, which I love because as I traveled around the country, I was able to compare my training with other chapters, right? So we actually give our LOs what we call like a certification slip. So everyone who's gone through training I guess since 2008, has received a badge that has your name, right, an ID number, which allows us to track people. Why is it important to track folk who are out there supposedly representing the guild? Why? Why? Just say it's.
If the guild has this kind of standards that they want and that they want to be neutral, you want to track who your people are, because if they aren't, if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, you want to know about that.
So we have a set of standards that we want our LOs, that we train our LOs to uphold. And in the event that perhaps some LOs may just need some retraining, maybe perhaps we get some feedback about people's behavior in the field, we're able to actually track those individuals, right? And I'll say this, during times of civil unrest, so I got called in Baltimore, which is different than just regular, what I call day-to-day actions, demonstrations. It was an uprising, right? You really want people who are well-trained and who you know in the field in that kind of a context. So once again, as you all are thinking about the qualifications and the types of training and the way to track LOs, even at a student level, think about perhaps providing some, just a certification badge, right? And we wear these when we're out in the field with our green hats. Let's see. And in the context of New York, folks, basically we get our green hats at our first demonstration. All right, so politics and purposes of legal observer. We kind of already talked about. These are my Harvard girls. This is Baltimore. So folks, all you all are probably familiar with what occurred around the Freddie Gray. It is not simply around the Freddie Gray situation. It is a long history of structural neglect that has occurred in urban areas throughout the United States that creates a benign, what I call benign neglect, right, of communities that either have lost jobs through the deindustrialization, right, poor educational systems, right, creates a situation where communities literally turn in on themselves, but they also lose, they no longer believe that the powers like police, right, are legitimate because of the practices they may in fact be using on these populations, right? So folks, these group of ladies came out and they were trained. I trained about 300 people in 2 days, right? So in Baltimore, there was a situation where we literally had to erect a rapid response legal system or a hub, right? We had to put in the infrastructure, and that is everything from training people who had never LO'd before and putting them out on the streets because we needed those number of bodies. Something else that we did that was very different than a traditional LO legal hub, and that is we brought in the community members to actually map out, because it was Southwest Baltimore, map out what we call where are the hot spots, where most do we need to apply or have LOs, right? How do we basically distribute our human resources? I'm not from Baltimore, I'm from New York. So naturally you would want to have people from the community. This is a shift for the Guild. The Guild normally has people who are Guild members, right, who then go out to other locations. Folks, if we're talking about true empowerment of communities, and I heard several people talk about how do we actually participate in building the infrastructure such that communities can defend themselves in the event of not just something like this, but a range of issues. That is, you work with communities by taking direction from communities as they're coming in and giving direction to communities. It's a shift in thinking, right, in terms of, even though I may have this skill set, folks, I can go out in the street and get hurt because I'm not from these areas, right? So once again, when you're thinking about legal observing, you want to think about how do you relate to community, right? And how comfortable you are with actually taking direction from people who may not have law degrees. They may not have any degrees, right? But they know their community's the best, right? So politics and purpose. We're there, folks, to play a supporting role. We all have politics. One of the issues that came up when I was in Baltimore, just even in the streets when I was doing my work in New York, is some legal observers felt that the way in which the protesters decided that they wanted to target, right, and or burn down, right, whatever it is, in this case a CVS or destroy property, that they felt that they shouldn't receive legal observer support. What do you all think? I'm turning it around. What do you all think? Y'all not going to be silent on this. Folk decide that their way of protesting is they're going to burn stuff down. I was about to say something. They're going to burn stuff down. Should we still provide them with legal observer support?
I think we should still be there.
Why?
Well, because I feel like regardless still have a responsibility to provide that neutral observation of what's going on so that they can be most effectively represented throughout their legal process, so that there is someone there who doesn't have, you know, a dog in the race, for lack of a better way to put it, to express what objectively occurred.
So tell me in 2 sentences.
Sorry.
Tell me in 2. No, it's okay. Tell me in 2 sentences why we should. What is the principle we're pulling on as to why, regardless of the way in which protesters decide to express their lack of faith in our democracy, right, that as a neutral body that's trying to hold our state or country accountable should provide support regardless of our personal beliefs about what their actions are?
Well, because again, that's not, I mean, it's not, those aren't our choices to make in that context. Those are their choices. We're just there to observe.
So the larger principle is what? Our role is to do what, regardless of what? Anybody? Anybody? Anybody?
Be neutral observers.
Thank you. Right? So the larger principle, folks, is that we don't make a moral judgment. We don't make moral judgments, right, on the tactics that protesters decide to use, right, in the event of protesting against the state. Because I heard at least 3 people talk about either they've even been an activist, right, in that regard, right? So our job as LOs is we're not out there to make a moral judgment. Some folks got into a conversation, some LOs got into a conversation. They had differing opinions on whether or not we should be out there. What do you think happened? Think about it. You're paired with someone who may have a different opinion, and you guys are out there, you get into a heated debate. What do you think happened? Can you? Thank you. Say it louder.
They stopped observing.
Folks, our primary role is to observe. So while y'all out there debating, we're missing, right, what's actually happening between law enforcement, or in this case, I think there were 5 different state law enforcement agencies that were, maybe more, that came into Baltimore, as well as the National Guard folks that were involved. So I literally, because I'm a photographer and a videographer, I literally went through and I was taking photos of all of the different law enforcement agencies that are out there, which leads me to another question, which I'll ask you later. Just keep it in your mind, and that is, why is it important as LOs to be aware of all of the different law agencies that are out there, including the National Guard, right, in the event people are arrested in mass numbers? Just keep that in your mind, right? So folks, bracket your political opinions when you're in the field. That's basically it. You don't want to get into a debate while you're out there, right? So we kind of talked about this. We're watching the police, folks. This includes documenting incidents and activities of law enforcement and other security forces, National Guard. Folks, something that was very unique about Baltimore that happens to be in the background. Baltimore is literally a case study of the new wave of the way black communities have told the National Lawyers Guild and the ACLU that you cannot just come into the community and set up a legal hub, right, and do all this support work without working under the governance structure of black community organizations. Ferguson was different. ACLU, NLG came in, set up a hub, right? For the most part, from my understanding, from speaking to folk, there's very little involvement of local communities, right, in that process. Baltimore, we got called. I got a text from someone who asked me, Dr. Jill, could you come to Baltimore to Legal Observe? I said yes, right? And when I got there, I was the only NLG person. I thought it was going to be a team of NLG members, people who were more experienced than me there. I was it, right? And I was sitting in there with me, the legal observer, someone who has 10, 11 years of experience, someone who does jail support, very experienced, someone who was a couple of attorneys who were running like the larger management piece of it. And we were it, folks. And we literally had to think through of how to design and immediately erect this legal hub, right, to provide services, which we did. But folks, this is the direction now, because now black communities are saying to the Guild, and this is important, you cannot just come in anymore and do this. We want people who are either representative of these communities or have the cultural sensitivity, right, of these communities, or at least are trained, right, in working in diverse situations, and you're up under the governance, right, system of the community. So the Baltimore Legal Defense model is the model that is basically moving across the country. That entity that we set up there, folks, is now called BALT, Baltimore Legal Action Team. It is a sustainable legal infrastructure, or shifted from a rapid response legal hub to a sustainable legal infrastructure that's embedded in the community now. And so I just want to share that with you. We're watching the police, and even though you're watching the police, folks, clearly you're going to be seeing what protesters are doing, right? So it's not that you don't see the protesters, it's that you don't document what the protesters are doing, obviously, right? Unless there's some kind of interaction with law enforcement. You're taking notes, right? And we'll talk a little about what you want to take in your notes. You're taking good notes because in the event that there are mass arrests, to the best of your ability, you will have gotten some names of people, their information, right? Because you're going to have to call that information in to the legal hub or to the hotline. In the context of New York, we tend not to video. We have a policy that we ask LOs not to video. And the reason why is, obviously, folks, you may think that you're just getting these two individuals, but lo and behold, I get two other people in the background who are doing something that might be considered illegal, right? So unless you actually get trained, right, in video surveillance, we actually ask LOs not to. That's something you guys, the kind of conversations you all want to talk about. Same thing with photos. And of course, folks, it's important to support the well-being of fellow legal observers. All right, so what's important, what's not the role of legal observers, right? This is also important. So obviously, folks, you don't want to wear political buttons or anything that's going to possibly be political. And the reason why is the police can make charges of, well, you all are supposed to be neutral, but here I see you're wearing something that's a political button, and as a result, it can delegitimize the role that you're playing, right? And that's the game that police play with LOs, right? You don't want to document, of course, protest behavior. You don't want to talk to the media. So sometimes, and particularly in Baltimore, media, they're out there, and they should be out there, but they'll come up to LOs and they'll ask you, well, you know, what's going on? Let me ask you a quick question. Should you, as a legal observer, talk to media? I see a couple of heads. Tex, right?
Yeah.
Tell me why.
I guess because it's just a state, you're putting yourself on the record, giving any sort of stance or opinion on the protest that might be used later.
Right, used for...
Used to, I guess, to portray you as biased, possibly.
Or more importantly, forget you as the LO, who are we supposed to actually be supporting? So forget you, but...
The protesters.
Right. Folks, we don't want to say anything that potentially could harm the protesters, you know, in terms of our perception of what we think about their tactics are, right, or what they've done. So normally when media comes up to me, I let the press know I'm a legal observer. I'm unable to put anything, say anything on the record. However, you refer them to whoever the organization's media person is, because they might have someone out there, right, that plays that role. You just defer them to that person. We don't act as police negotiators, and specifically what that means is a police officer, and this has happened to me several times, will come up to me and ask me specifically, could you convey this information to the group? Right? So the example is the die-ins that occurred at, what's the huge train station in New York? And I can't... Thank you, and I live in New York. So Grand Central Station, I'm observing a die-in, right? The administrators basically came up to me or called me over and said, we were good, right? We let the protesters do their thing. We were good, right? And I'm like, are you asking me a question or are you making a statement? That's the first thing, right? They wanted to make a statement. We let them protest without arresting them, right? Could you now, since they're just lying down on the floor now, not doing anything, could you now ask them to leave? My response was, give me a little bit more.
Or that you should go talk to them themselves.
There you go. I just simply said, I'm a legal observer. I always let them know who I am, right? I'm a legal observer, And, you know, you should actually ask, right, look for an organizer to ask that question to, right, pose that question to. It's also a game, folks, right? So I'm running in the streets of New York, literally running in the streets of New York, and the police officers who are also running with us, because we're following the protesters, will walk up to me, because everyone's tired, will walk up to me and say, well, do you know what direction they're going now? Where are they going? Are they done? What do you think I say? No, what do you think? Look, folks, it's a play. We're all playing a role. What do you think I say?
I'm a legal observer. What do you know?
Right. I will say something. Yeah, they know I'm a legal observer. I'll be like, I don't know. Where do you think they're going? Right? So, folks, I just want to share with you, part of it is it's theater, right? Because the police try to get illicit information from us the same way that perhaps sometimes we try to elicit information from them. So it's theater out there. Right? And of course, be aware of how your actions may be perceived by law enforcement. So it's something, there are occasions, and you don't have to if you don't feel comfortable. There are sometimes when I do approach law enforcement, particularly legal affairs, right? Because I've established a relationship with legal affairs. Legal affairs are you all who might work for police departments, and it says, at least in the context of NYPD, it says on the back of their black jackets, legal affairs. I've established a rapport with them, one particular individual. And the rapport is just sort of, I'm not familiar, where are they taken, when folk are arrested in this particular area, where are they taking them, right? Which facility? And they, right, reciprocate in terms of letting me know, right? So a lot of it has to do with the kind of rapport you choose to build with certain individuals, right? I tend not to interact or speak a lot to what I call just regular police on the street, even though we recognize each other all the time. I see them at the CUNY protests. And we might laugh because we see each other literally almost every week at the same protest, right? Protesters are watching you, right? How friendly you are with police, right? Same thing with police. They will watch and see how you interact with protesters. So it's a dance. It's a delicate balance in terms of how you kind of maneuver through this field. Folks, you can't ask questions if you have questions. Right? You guys are tired. I'm like 51 years, I gotta say it, folks, I'm 51 years old, and I feel like I'm more like, more, energetic than my 20-something-year-olds in here, or 30-something-year-olds. Okay, so folks, how are we structured, right? And this is important. Like any other organization, folks, it's what I call a command control structure, right? So we have the National Lawyers Guild office where Susan Howard is the executive director. So she's our legal hub. When we deploy in the field, we get deployed in the field depending on the type of action that we get a request for. So for example, if you all were an activist organization and you wanted us to come and legal observe this training, one of you all would send in a request through our website saying we'd like to have some LOs attend our UVA LO training, right? Susan would then send out an email post to all of us LOs who are on the list, and we would reply back, right, which ones of us could actually come here and LO for the event, right? This is just sort of what I call a static event. It's in one place. If it is a large event, like at the Eric Garner protest, 50,000 people showed up, right? So of course we knew it was going to be a large march, and what we did was we identified, I think we had 10 captains who were responsible for supervising teams, right? No more than about 5 people, right? So we had multiple teams that we had already organized, or we organized right on site, right, to monitor that march. So depending on the type of the march determines how we organize ourselves, right, as legal observers and the number of people that come out. In terms of information flow, right? So folks, we've evolved. Before, people used to tell me, well, even when I started 10 years ago, we would just, I don't even think we text then, right, in terms of how we communicated with each other in the field. Now, folks, you got text. We use Signal. How many of you all use the encrypted Signal? When you're setting up your legal observer program and you're thinking about your communication protocols, you want to use an encrypted system. And the reason why, folks, is that the police have something called stingrays that intercepts. You guys, I know you guys have heard of this, right? It intercepts digital messages. It can not only intercept it, it can redirect it, right? Or it can direct the information to, I think they call them fusion centers in LA. So we use something called Signal, which is an encrypted communication system, and that's how we basically communicate any kind of communication to the legal hub, or amongst us when we're out in the field, or we call. But Signal, and I think that's the only one that I know. I'm sure there are others, right? What kind of information are we talking about? So clearly, folks, you come to an action. The first thing you do is you share your information, identify another LO, right, who's out there. Share your contact information immediately, right? Do not be out there without making sure another LO, right, has your information, obviously for safety reasons, and you have to share information when you're in the field. So you check in, right? You decide where you all are going to basically be stationed, depending on what it is, the particular type of action. If you have to use the restroom, folks, because we're human, and I've been on marches that are like 10, 12-hour long in New York, literally, right? So you want to make sure that you take your breaks. Emotional health and welfare is important. On the ground logistics types of information. What you don't want to share, and this is another one of the type of policies you want to think about. You guys are lawyers to be. What kind of information do you think that you wouldn't want to put on Signal, even if it's encrypted, which you wouldn't want to put on Signal? You guys witness an arrest, or you witness something that police are doing. What wouldn't you want to put on Signal, and why?
Legal work product.
You break that down for me, please. Legal work product.
Things that would otherwise be covered by confidentiality.
Okay, so give me an example. You guys would, I just got arrested. Someone just got arrested. What would you not put on Signal? Yeah.
Anything incriminating that they may have done before that.
Right, exactly. Right, so you might just say something like, two or three people were arrested. If you can possibly get the officer's name, if you're able to see that, or the precinct, or their precinct car might be there. So folks, basically you don't want to write a whole thesis on Signal, right? Because precisely this information can be possibly
Used against the person.
Right. Right, or something else. As I learned from attorneys, even though I put on my little notepad, this is an attorney. What is it? What is that thing, you guys? I got told by attorneys to put on my notepad so that it can't be, what is it, sequestered as evidence or discovery? This is attorney work. Say it again. Thank you. So on all my little notepads, if I can find my, here it is. I now write, and you'll see it on one of these next slides, just that this is a work attorney, say it again? Thank you, attorney-client privilege. I'm not an attorney, I'm a social scientist, right? But it's on here, right? Okay. Oh, it's going to flip back. That other slide, if I push this button, it's going to go all the way to the beginning. But this other, but let me do it anyway. There it does work. So, folks, something that is important from the very beginning, and I'm going to restructure this curriculum, is cultivating cognitive awareness. So even from the very beginning, folks, when we start, when you come onto the scene, you want to make sure that you are intentionally aware, right, of your, not just your cognitive mental processes, but your emotional processes. Because I'm going to share this with you. You're going to see things, if you haven't already experienced it, in the field when you're legal observing that can elicit intense emotional responses. We're human, right? And there are unconscious triggers, right, that are resided in our amygdala, for those of you who study the new neuroscience, right? And that can come out when you get in intense situations, whether you're aware of it or not, right? So this concept of cognitive awareness that I integrated into teaching, training of legal observing, one comes out of me just being an instructor for several years and working with students and understanding how the interaction between emotion and our cognitive processes interact, right? But then also because I'm embodied differently, I happen to be in brown skin, woman, a queer woman with short natural, primarily working with Caucasian, straight, some gender, non-gender conforming individuals who may not understand or have the same experiences, of course, as me because I'm embodied differently. It's just We just have different experiences, right? But their actions impact me, right? So for example, if I'm partnered with a colleague of mine, whether he's male, right, or someone who might be white, raced as white, when we basically come up and we do a police line, and I'm with them because I'm their partner, they can be more assertive. Some individuals are more assertive. They will take their pen and they'll go down the line. Now clearly, folks, for those of you who understand this, it elicits an emotional response for me because I know that if the police choose to retaliate, they're going to retaliate against that thing that they consider as blackness. It doesn't matter that I'm a human being, female, Dr. Humphries, this or that. In the way we've been socialized in our societies, that I represent something that's scary, that's non-human, right, that's violent. And so if they have a reaction, it's going to potentially perhaps be directed towards me. My colleagues aren't aware of that. So after being on the streets for 10 years, I said, it's really important that I begin to train you all, right, and also having conversations with my colleagues that we need to be aware of this, all of us. And it can also be along gender identity, right? So I work with folk who are transgender, right? And the same thing, that the way in which my interactions, right, may impact my transgender partner differently, right? I need to be aware of that. So I introduce this now. I teach cognitive awareness, which is just a nice word for us to want to say, let's be aware of our implicit bias, which is a different concept, which I'm sure you all have been exposed to now, which is, right, the unconscious stereotypes that we may have about particular groups, right? And it's unconscious, but then at the same time, it influences our decisions and may impact people in negative ways. I have plenty of other scenarios where I can share with you when that comes up in my context of legal observing. And what I talk to people about is, you can use identity, I call it strategic deployment of identity. There are times when my white, older male colleagues, when we talk about this, your role is to go up to the white male police officer or the male officers and to say, hey, is it okay if my partner over here stands next to the police wagon, right? Because we know there's going to be multiple arrests. And then my job is to be over there near the police wagon and to be able to collect the names of people when there are mass arrests. Now, we consciously had a conversation about how we're going to strategically deploy our identity, knowing, folks, right, that it does reproduce privilege, right? But my job, or our job, is to do what as LOs? Ultimately, our job is to do what as LOs? Right, observe, be neutral, observe, document, and be able to get people's names in the event they're arrested. It's just being conscious about how you want to strategically use your identity in these particular contexts. Communication, it's important. For a lot of people, it's unnerving, right? So I see some people, when I talk about this, they go like this, right? So at least in the context of the U.S., even though body language varies across cultures, in the context of the U.S., from observing students who I teach, have taught around a range of issues of difference, when I see them go like this, I realize that they feel uncomfortable, right? So the same thing when I observe and I'm talking to law students and folk go like this, when we talk about these issues, I recognize people are, feeling uncomfortable. It's okay. That's a perfect example of how your emotions, right, override your mental or cognitive processes. So let's go to, how do you come prepared? This is incredibly important, folks, because the actions have changed over the 10 years that I've been in the streets. Before, I did not carry a backpack. I just had a little pad, my hat. Action might be a couple hours, it's done. Folks, I spent 16 hours in the field in Baltimore. 16-hour days, right, back to back, right? Now that's unusual because of an uprising, but and we're having more of these types of actions, right? So how do we come prepared? One, folks, the first thing, of course, is contact the organizers ahead of time. That's what the hub does. Contact a fellow legal observers. That's what our communication network. Folks, I think I have hundreds of these pads now. I tend to take notes in these pads. Some of you all have smartphones, and you might feel more comfortable doing it on a smartphone, but if you're going to use a smartphone, what do you think could happen to your phone in 16 hours? Let's see if I can get it out. Right, so here's my solar batteries because my phone died on some crazy march in the streets of Manhattan, right? So I have a cellular, I have basically solar batteries that connect into my phone, but I also have a solar pad that this connects into that can charge my solar batteries if I'm literally out there, right? So I have a, what is it called? Solar panels that this connects into to charge my solar batteries, right? If I'm out there for extended periods of time. All right, so you want to come prepared with your batteries. Let's see. Snacks, folks, I tend to eat like a squirrel. I just expend energy. Whatever the nature of your metabolism is, just be prepared, have your water. You lose salt and sugar, right? So folks, make sure you've got whatever is going to replace that. What else? Some folk may have medical needs. This is crucially important, folks. In Baltimore, my team of LOs, we arrive at the scene of Pennsylvania North. We see in the distance like smoke. Black smoke means that the fire's still going. White smoke means that they've already put it out. We see black smoke. The first thing I ask my team is, what do you think I ask folk? Before we even walk towards the fire, the black smoke, what do you think I ask my crew of 3 or 4 people immediately? Thank you. Does anybody have any medical conditions that they should not be walking into an open fire situation? Perhaps you can be positioned someplace else. Someone said they had asthma. Someone else said they had a compromised immune system, right? You've got to be able to think like this on your feet. I'm going to tell you, you may think that you're going to an action and it's slow, there's nothing happening. Next thing you know, something pops off and you immediately have got to talk to your partner and find out information. You can do this ahead of time, right, and be prepared. What else? Check the weather, folks. I have LO'd and everything from hot, 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 humid, 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 to cold, 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 freezing, 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 and having to put those heating pads in whatever those things are, you squeeze them, they get hot in your gloves. And I don't like the cold. I don't want to be out in the cold, but dress appropriately. You don't want to do open toes, folks. I tend to wear, I just have some, if you guys know about EM, any sporting goods store will have I tend to wear kind of like a hybrid between a hiking boot, right? Something that I can still run in, but something that also protects my feet. And the reason why is after being in Baltimore and there were open projectiles, things were on fire, glass, I was like, you know what? You could easily get hurt wearing some, folks, you can easily get hurt. There you go. You can easily get hurt, folks, literally, I'm serious, wearing something like this. If you step on a shard of glass, that can go right through this. So just kind of be aware. Even though it may appear that it's just a simple action, we don't think anything's going to happen, something can happen just like that. Let's see. Emergency contact. So folks, not only does the head office have my family emergency contact information and my medical information, I have a network outside of the Guild, right? So I have a network of friends and family that live outside the state that in the event that you don't hear from me within an hour or two, because I do hourly check-ins, call the head office and find out where am I. Have I been arrested? Am I in the hospital? Right? So you want to seriously just think about setting up 2 tiers, right, of emergency contacts. Right? So what else came out of the Baltimore context? And this is what I literally carry now when I LO. I don't care where I go. So in Baltimore, folks, every police locale, and you want to begin to do this, you can do it, you guys are just walking on the street. Every police locale has different tactics, right? The way the police want to command and control, not just protesters, but even us just walking on the street. So in Baltimore, they have something called a T formation. You all are the police formation that I'm watching, right? But the police are inching up here. The police are inching up this street. They're inching up this street. I'm looking this way, which means I'm not aware, I can't see what's going on. Plus, I'm partly blind in my right eye. So out of that situation, I bought a monocular. I'm with a partner, and his or her role, or their role, is to be face backwards to me and to basically monitor, right? Do you see police inching in? That is their particular tactic they use. I will share this with you. It's real. I was doing a training in Baltimore, and I was sharing this situation, and there was a Baltimore police officer in the audience, and he smiled. I didn't know the name of the tactical formation. He smiled and said, it's called a T formation, right? He's the one who gave me the proper name. So I'm just kind of sharing with you, as you all are walking around the streets now, start paying attention when you see police stop people, right? Where do police stand, right? If you see several police officers, what are the formations they use? Because that information is crucial for you when you're in the event that you're legal observing, that you understand that immediately, oh, they are about to either advance, right, on people, or they're withdrawing, or whatever it is, right, that they're going to do tactically. You literally become specialists in reading police movements, right? So my activist friends, folks, there's a possibility that you might be in a situation where there's fire, where there's tear gas, where there's pepper gas. I didn't used to carry a bandana, but my activist friends taught me, right, that you wet this, right, and you basically tie it around, right? So those of you, you're very important, Mr. Non-Lawyer, Mr. Activist, because I would hope that you might have knowledge of activist preparation and tactics that you could share with perhaps our budding, right, folk here, right, who may not know that. Something else, right? So, folks, we're going to walk through this. The police, as you know, it's got to be about a 15-year program now, right? So we've been, the police, through a federal program, I think is it 1823, but don't quote me, look it up. It's a program where local police can purchase military-grade weapons through our federal government, right? As a result, folks, our police are militarized. And what does that mean? They no longer just carry a simple revolver with 12 rounds. They literally have military-grade weapons that has multiple rounds, right, and bullets that can, you know, basically obliterate parts of our body. But they also use other, what they call non-lethal weapons, i.e., the general term sound cannons, the technical term long-range acoustic devices, right? They used it in New York. They also used it in Baltimore, because I was standing right in front of it. And in the context of New York, the sound cannon comes out, it's pulled out on an open bed truck, so you can see it if you're in LO. And if you see something like this, it's normally at the back of the march, you document it immediately and you call it in to whoever's in the hub and get your, and I would hope that you're working with lawyers, right? You immediately report that to them, right? In the context of Baltimore, it came out in a van, and I'm standing there and I'm saying, what is this van that the police line just opened up, like parting of the sea, and a van, black van, couldn't see it, and I said, there's something in the van. And in my mind, I said, it might be a sound cannon. And lo and behold, it was turned on, right? So sound cannon, folks, is basically a high-pitched noise, and they can turn up the decibels. They can bust your eardrums, depending on how high they turn up the decibels. But it can also cause crippling muscle contractions, right? So even though I stood there for the 7 minutes, I asked someone later on, well, how do you prepare for that? And all the activists shared with me was, you know, the best, just take some, folks, there's nothing. You know, if you can't, I'm just going to say this, don't subject yourself to these types of devices. Just don't. We don't know the effects on people's bodies, right? But the bottom line is, folks, I carry a packet of earplugs for my fellow LOs in the event those of us who are a little bit more hardcore want to stand out there and get, you know, whatever it is gets done to us. I think that's it. So, folks, since I am optically impaired, right, I will tell you this. I'm running on the Manhattan Bridge following the protesters after like 9 hours, and they decided they're going to hop over and run towards the oncoming traffic. My partner and I said, nah, not this time. We're going to hop down back onto the road, the walkway, and try to like run and catch up to them. But it's night, my vision becomes impaired. I didn't see the wire or whatever, and I went bammed right into it. My glasses went flying. The bottom line is this, folks. If you wear glasses, just get a glass holder, right? Put your glasses in, and hopefully it will solve the problem, right? Basically, if you wear contacts, folks, I'm going to say this now. If you wear contacts and the police break out pepper spray or tear gas, it's going to get trapped in between the contact and your eye. It is going to burn like I don't know what. So you might want to just opt for that day that you're LOing out there, put your glasses on. Anything else that's, oh yes. Okay, so folks, and I'd spend time on this, because it's crucial for your own safety, right? I shared with you that there are kind of projectiles in Baltimore. In the event you have to pick something up, move something out the way, I've got gloves, I carry a first aid kit. In the event that you yourself have to, because there's no medics, medics normally run with us, right? There are medic teams. I don't know if you guys have medic teams, street medics, right, that are part of the culture here, but they are in New York and other parts of the country. But if they're not, in the event you get pepper sprayed or tear gas in your eyes and you have to clean out your own eyes, folks, so I carry water, or there's, I think it's, you mix it magnesium and water, right, to rinse out your eyes. Okay, I think that's it in terms of safety. So let's move on, now that everybody's like, I don't want to hello. This is, folks, this is, I'm just preparing you. It doesn't mean that you're going to actually encounter this, but you want to be prepared, right? We kind of went over meet up and team up. Where do we position ourselves? Give me a time check, folks, somebody. 6:50. Thank you. Everybody's like tired, 6:50. Okay, so where do we position? I'd rather over-prepare you than you guys, like, get out there and, like, not be prepared. Just bear with me. So where do we position ourselves? Very quickly. Notice we got the LOs, 3 hats. Folks, if we've got 1 police officer, the bottom line is if there's a line of police officers, or if we call them the motorcycle squad, like we have in New York, I don't know what the culture is here in Charlottesville, but if there's a motorcycle squad here, this person over here does not want to be here. Because if the police decide to rush, the protesters are going to go this way, and this person's going to get smashed. So the logic is, to the best of your ability, you don't want to get trapped in between a line of police and protesters, which means that you want to need to position yourself, and you learn this when you're out there in the street, right? Some way that you're not trapped in between those 2 bodies of people. Arrests occur, right? Let's say there's a rush, an arrest occurred. What do we want to document? What we want to document, oh, there it is. Privilege and confidential attorney client work product. That's what they told me to write. So on my notepads, that's what I write. Bottom line is this. You're at an event. We document the event name, the event date, location. What's really important, what does this identify? 2 white shirts, 8 blue shirts. Tell me in Charlottesville, how are your commanders or ranking officers, how are they dressed? You guys even watch the police?
I haven't seen anyone who's dressed in a normal uniform.
Normal uniform, but
Yeah.
white
Well,
shirt or?
I guess I mean they all appear to be dressed in the same uniform. Even the ones who came to speak to us from the person down here, which was a blue shirt.
Blue shirts. So what I heard was that commanding officers as well as what I call just the foot police officers all wear the same uniform. Is that correct? Is that a uniform? No one, you guys haven't observed. Okay, so here's your first exercise. You want to find out if you guys are in law school, come on. So you want to find out, are there any differences in the way in which your commanding officers dress? White shirt in New York. Los Angeles, they're not. They're all the same, I couldn't tell, right? So commanding officers might have a chevron, right, which is like a little triangle, right? If they're a lieutenant, it's a bar, right? Those would be your commanding officers. The reason why it's important, folks, is that in the event that you have to speak to police, you want to speak to the commanding officer, the highest ranking officer in the field. Now, if you don't have a commanding officer and you just have what I call regular police officers, you might have someone who's a sergeant. Sergeants have the upside down chevron, right? So you want to look for, yes?
Why do you want to speak to the highest officer?
You tell me. Why do you want to speak to the highest officer and not just regular, what I call police?
The highest officer presumably would have more information about what's going on. But I don't know specifically why you would go with that person instead of something else.
Do you think that perhaps there's a difference in training?
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Right? In terms of how a commanding officer might interact with the public differently than what I just say folk who are everyday, right? So in the event that you have to talk to someone about arrest, remember your role. It's a very sensitive issue. in terms of eliciting information from people who've actually either done the arrest or possibly have perceptions about you as an LO who's watching them. Remember, folks, please don't, the culture of the police is that they are socialized, because it's socialization, right? They're socialized into a role of authority, right? Not necessarily always a role of, accountability, that they are actually accountable to the citizens that they were supposed to protect, right? But they're in a role of authority in terms of their socialization. So here you are, actually observing them, right, and can possibly get them in trouble, right? So, folks, if you have to talk to the police, try to identify either the highest ranking officer or commanding officer that's out there. Let's see, because they are also the ones who are responsible for the behavior, right, of those who are there supervising. Let's see what else. I don't know the culture here in Charlottesville. Do you all have police? Tell me.
Yeah.
You have police officers on motorcycles, little scooters, okay? So in New York City, they're the ones who are corralling, right, or controlling the crowd. What is their role here in Charlottesville when I heard someone say there was a protest in Charlottesville? No?
Oh, I said Charlotte.
Charlotte. So tell me, can you describe that protest from the police that were out there?
I wasn't there.
Does anybody know about the protests in Charlotte? Have you guys had protests here? Okay. Yes?
Yeah. But I didn't see any police on motorcycle at those protests.
What would just describe to me the police presence?
It was pretty disorganized here, but they were just mainly trying to get people off streets. That's what I remember.
And how were they doing that?
Sometimes it was just telling people, but other times they physically,
No, I don't know. Physically, they what?
Physically moved them
How?
with their arms, their body, using contact.
Please come to the front. Please come to the front. Please come to the front. Okay, so we're just gonna enact it. So I'm in the street. And you're a police officer trying. So show me physically.
But maybe a little more.
So they physically touch. They are physically touching.
Yeah.
Okay. Do they have with their batons?
Some of them got the batons out after people pushed back from when they were getting pushed out of the street.
What type of baton did they have?
I don't know, batons.
Was it a standard baton or was it a tractable?
Oh, it was. Yeah, they had to pull it out.
So it was a retractable. Folks, there are standard batons that are not retractable, and then there are ones that you pull out. So let me ask you something. The standard ones are about this length. Retractables are how long?
I would say it's like about the size of a baseball bat, like length of a baseball bat.
So much longer than a standard. So tell me, if I'm this close, and I think that their baton can't reach me, but as they pull it out, it actually can.
Yeah, you could get it.
Right. So as an LO, why is it important for you to understand the equipment that police use?
So you know what a safe distance is.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Right. Right. So that's what she just described is the kind of description and detail that you all need to really come up to speed on, because part of when we're documenting is what are the circumstances that led to the arrest or potential interaction, right? And she described protesters were in the street. You're going to also have to describe the actions that the police took. And remember, folks, you're not going to have time to just you're literally going to be, if you look at my notes, all of my notes, folks, are scribbled. They are literally scribbled because this stuff happens fairly quickly. And if something happens that, is a serious situation, you literally have to be able to be aware, observe, and write and document very quickly in shorthand the best you can, right? Because there's a possibility that you may be contacted by an attorney, right, who's representing someone, which happened to me a month ago. I'm on the NPAP. I heard someone said that they were interested in police accountability. If you're interested in police accountability, the National Lawyers Guild has a network called the National Police Accountability Project. Join it, because you literally have it's a fantastic way to learn just from from these attorneys who are doing this work across the country. So it's a network where attorneys are sharing information in briefs and motions. An attorney posted, I just filed a civil claim against NYPD over an action that occurred on a particular date. I read it and I said, oh, I allowed that event. So I sent him an email and said, and this occurred a year ago. I sent him an email and said I was an LO for that event. If you'd like to speak to me, this is my contact information. When I spoke to him, he specifically asked me, did you have notes? I said yes. I said I documented the arrest and I scanned my notes and sent it to him. And what he said to me was, one, there was too much detail, but it was regarding something else, right? There was too much detail because I had actually called an attorney literally in the field around a flag burning situation. But the actual arrest, he couldn't read my notes. I said, oh, OFC stands for officer, and it had the officer's name, and the description was pileup. Because, and I wrote, and I had the person who they piled up on, because what I had witnessed was this particular police officer and several others had literally piled up on this woman, and that's how I described it, and that was the person he was defending. So what I'm sharing with you folks is really, really important for you to be able to, as best you can, figure out a way to document these situations in a shorthand context in as much detail as you can, because a year later, you literally might have an attorney calling you, right, regarding your notes. Okay. One last note. What do you think this stands for? This says van at the end, by the way. So MSCF 103 van. That license, how many of you look, other than the license plate, what else? Think about police cars and vans. What's on the side of them? That's it. Why is it important to document?
So you know, I guess which one they were in case something happened.
Where they're going, which precinct, right, folks? So this kind of information is important. I'm going to do this slide. You guys tell me, what's the tone and tenor of the police? Got 2 seconds. Tone and tenor.
They're ready to make some arrests.
Why?
They got a lot of those makeshift handcuffs.
Flexi cuffs. What else?
Very stiff.
Very stiff. What else?
They're masked down.
Right, the riot gear, mask down. What else? Look at, someone's got a hand on their gun. Look at the person who's holding the baton. You notice something? Can you see his hands? He's holding a baton in gloves, right? So how many of you actually mixed it up with police? Those police who wear gloves possibly indicate what? What do gloves do or can do? If I hit you, do I want to hit you with my bare hand? Folks, my experience is that police officers, not all the time, but I've seen it quite a lot, who wear gloves, tend to have a tendency to like to mix it up, just like there are activists who like to mix it up. So you need to pay attention. Which officers have gloves? Matter of fact, I literally see police officers, when they say they're about to make mass arrests, there's some who pull out their gloves and start putting their gloves on. You got to pay attention to that, right? They might be the individuals that may have more interaction with protesters, right? I put this slide in. It's important for you all because you live in a region of the country that you may actually encounter this more so in other areas. I worked at Blacksburg, Virginia Tech, a few years back, right? Coming from the West Coast and living, and not realizing where I am, just politically and culturally, right, folks? So this is McKinney, Texas, right? Protest that I'm monitoring. Someone comes up with you guys know what's the weapon? You guys gotta know weapons. It's an assault rifle. It's a domestic AK-15. It's a variation of military, right? So I went up to him, and I just very quietly asked, strategic deployment of gender. How do you think I approached him? Black women, short hair, not culturally, my hair's not pressed, not permed, so I violate some of the cultural norms about how black women are supposed to present themselves. So how do you think I presented myself gender-wise? To a white man in McKinney, Texas, with an AK-15 at a protest against the police.
Very fit.
Yeah. And also very what? you know, I don't know much about weapons. Can you tell me, what is that? Right? So he tells me, you know, what I really was assessing was it loaded? Oh, does it have live ammunition? Yeah. Oh, how many rounds? Oh. And he went on to tell me that in Texas, it's an open carry state. New York is not. I've never encountered anything like this in my life, ever, legal observing. You all, is Virginia an open carry state? Guys, come on now. Y'all are scaring me. You all are scaring me. It's not an open. So what should you do before you get on the street? It is okay. I hear not. I hear pretty sure it's not, and I hear.
I'm pretty sure that the state is, but Virginia's weird because it does have some cities, which Charlottesville is one of, that have their own, like, truly independent laws on that front. So I know Richmond has different laws than most of the rest of the state does. I grew up in Virginia, but I haven't lived here in years, so.
Okay. What's the first thing that, I don't care if you have a backpack or not, what's the first thing that you all going to do before you get on the streets? Is look for what? Law? Is Charlottesville, because you might end up legal observing someplace else, but is Charlottesville an open carry, since it might have its own local, that's the first, I'm just going to say this. Somebody in here's got a smartphone and should look that up, right? Before you even get out on the street, right? The reason why folks, in here in the classroom, you know, this, on the street, you're out there and you walk, and someone walks up there with an AK-15, your emotion, I'm just going to say this to you, no matter how well I am trained, it still elicited an emotional response, yes.
Virginia is an open carry state.
Okay, but what about Charlottesville? I heard that there are local variations.
It is actually, there's like
Open carry?
in Charlottesville, yeah.
So folks.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow, okay.
There's a lot of the other cities in Virginia, it's not allowed, but
Like the
Charlottesville.
bigger cities, not on the list.
Yeah.
That where it's prohibited, so it should be.
So what you all want to kind of do, caucus, is get some speak to one of your attorney, your professors who does this kind of law, right? Bottom line is that amygdala, that part of your brain, folks, listen up. That part of your brain that has the automatic emotional response, you really, really want to work on and assess whether or not how comfortable you all are around open arms. That's the bottom line. Something like this. The other folk that marched up here were the Tea Party folk. In New York, folks, police do an excellent job at separating counter-protesters from each other, Palestinians from Israeli supporters. They're on separate sides of the street. McKinney, the police let them come right up to each other, right? I don't know what your culture is here in terms of how your police deal with counter-protesters. So that's another area that someone in your group needs to begin to understand. Folks, this is a particular African-American group that has a belief that African-Americans are not citizens, that we are in fact part of the Moorish nation and therefore should not be protesting to the state against state violence against us because we're not citizens, but in fact we should use the United Nations as a vehicle, as a separate nation to make our protest because nations use treaties like the Native Americans, right? Bottom line, and I know this, I'm going to just say I know the group because I just know particularly black cultural different groups, right? So when they showed up on the scene in McKinney, Texas, and they were shadowing the marchers, when I finally got a chance to see who they were, I was like, oh, they're not a threat. I understand. It's a theological argument. Bottom line is this. As LOs, you have to assess who's out there. Are they a danger to you first, right? Are they a danger to the people, the protesters? But you've got to do that work. However you got to do it, you've got to figure out how to make that assessment. We did documenting arrests. Paul is the individual I said that I work with quite a bit. He trained me. Specifically, Paul, this is the individual I said that we use our strategic deployment of identity. Paul's an older white male. Notice he can get that close to the officer. I cannot get that close. Officers always tell me, get out of the way, move out, because they either think I'm a protester, even though I have a green hat on, right? So Paul and I work together strategically. He approaches the commanders. Is it okay if my partner, and he's always does it in a very Gentile way, is it okay if my partner situates herself over here? In the event they're arrested, we can get their names. Yes. Right? However, when Captain Lombardi, no. Lieutenant Lombardo comes onto the scene, right? Lieutenant Lombardo, who you've read probably in papers, right, particularly New York Times, is the individual who is Lieutenant Lombardo of Afghanistan, who worked in black cells, right? And so we have a police officer who's trained in psychological ops, right? And so when he comes into the scene, he's very stern, and his energy is very different, and he always says no. And when he says no, you move, because Lieutenant Lombardo is very scary in his presentation, but he also uses psychological ops against activists by calling them by their first names. Because just like we know who the police officers are, they're also collecting information, right? Because we have different units out there that are taking information, and not just LOs, but also activists. So he will approach the activists by their first names. Now think about this. If you're out there amongst 100 people and Lieutenant Lombardo approaches you by your first name, think about just sort of, how does this man know who I am? And this particular man knows who I am, right? So the police use various tactics. Remember I said to command and control, right, activists? So you want to be aware of that. What are we collecting? Clearly, names of arrests. There are different ways in which you do this, folks. In this particular situation, you may be able to get close to someone. Other situations, folks, I'm going to tell you. Tell me your name. I'm with the National Lawyers Guild. Give me your name. I can get an attorney for you. And they will yell it back, right? Give me your date of birth. In the event, folks, that you are dealing with individuals who are transgender and or individuals who have different cultural identities, so transgender individuals may or may not be using what? Their birth name. And why is it important to have their birth and legal name? Thank you. So we have to, and normally folk, they're rolling with an affinity group, and someone will walk up to you like they've done with me and say, his or her name, legal name is this, right? It's important because that's the information that you've got to get to the legal hub, right, to track them through the system. There are some groups, i.e. particularly African-American groups, who use cultural names, i.e. Asante. That's not necessarily their legal name, right? So you have to be cued in as to which communities you're dealing with and whether or not you actually have their legal names too, right? You also want to document, there's another status, immigration status. You might have folks who are undocumented, right? They're vulnerable. So once again, you want to make sure that if you're dealing with someone who's been arrested, who's undocumented, you want to make sure that you target that because you want to get them out of the system as possible, or get them through the system as fast as possible. Same thing with transgendered folks. We know that transgendered individuals normally have a higher propensity of violence being enacted towards them, both by the police, right, as well as possibly placing them in their not gendered identity. So someone who might be an female to male, right, or male to female will be placed in a male cell, right, but their gender identity presentation is female. So it sets them up for a level of violence. So we're trying to get people out of that as best as possible. Once again, the National Lawyers Guild, the National Police Accountability Project, has 2 documents that they've published specifically on addressing the needs of transgendered individuals who are arrested and addressing the needs of sex workers who are arrested, and then, of course, the intersection of that, folk who are transgendered who might also be sex workers. I'm going to skip that slide because we've talked a little bit about this. I don't know to what extent, folks, this is Baltimore, so this is where I was, right? So I shared with you. Sound cannon is in here. This is the CVS that's on fire that you probably saw on CNN, right? So this is the police line in Cavalier in full riot gear, right? So once again, you all have to assess how comfortable you can be that close, right? With the possibility, of course, of getting assaulted, right? But the objective is not to get assaulted. The objective is to the best as you can, observe at a safe distance if you can, right? Or if they give dispersal orders, to leave, which raises a question. What's a dispersal order? Before you guys get out there on the street, you got to know this. What's a dispersal order? Okay, let's just break it down. Dispersal means what?
They're telling the protesters to leave.
Right, not just protesters, but everybody. And so what do they have to, technically, police have to say what, how many times, and make it audible in order for it to be valid in court in terms of dispersal order. Police have to say what and how many times, and people have to what, and there has to be, I'm literally giving you all the legal, so police have to say what? There's a difference between just move out the way and they don't say please.
This is please disperse.
Disperse, right? You have just, and how many times they have to say it?
3 times.
And how you have to be able to audible, and you have to have, they call it egress, a way to get, it can't be blocked. U.S. legal observers have to know that, because what are you guys doing? You're not just taking, you're taking notes, but you have, if they get, so if people are arrested, say it again. Right, because in the event that they don't meet any of those and people are arrested, what is your job? Right, because they violated whatever that statute is in terms of dispersal. This is really important, the dispersal order, right, folks? And making sure that it's a difference between, I think, I'm sorry, tell me your name again. Stephanie said, the police were just like, move off the sidewalk. That's, as opposed to, if you don't move off the sidewalk, you're going to be arrested. Right, there's a difference. It's just militant, folks, it's just showing you what you possibly may encounter in the event there's a serious action that occurs. Right? I don't know to what extent and types of units they have here in Charlottesville. It's another research question. Right, so we're almost at the end, folks. We're at the end. How many of you have encountered canines? How many of you have dogs? Dogs are pack dogs. What does a pack dog mean? Dogs are pack dogs, which means what? There's normally... You just said it. So look, when you're dealing with canine, let me just break it down. When you're dealing with canines, and I learned it in Baltimore, because I never encountered canine units, right? Just saw it on whatever these police shows are. Notice how the leash is like this. It's like the retractable baton. How long do you think the leash can go if they were to let it go? You guys saw what happened in North Dakota, right, with the Native Americans? Did you see when the security, they had the dogs like this, and then they let the leash go, and it was able to jump probably like to where you are. So if you are a legal observer, and I realized this when I was out there in Baltimore, because at first I didn't realize that the leash was that long, the last thing I want to do is be within the length of the leash. The other thing is, when you're dealing with canines, you don't want to have your arms out like this because they're going to attack, right? So you want to make sure that you've got your arms in like this. You also don't want to look alpha dogs or pack dogs in the eye. That's a sign of you're ready to, you're going to fight. You're going to challenge them, right? So you just kind of want to not look at them in their eyes, have your arms in your pockets or to your side, and stay out of the length of the leash. And that's all I can say about dealing with canines. How many have dealt with mounted police? They have mounted police here?
No, they don't.
Okay, no mounted police. In the event that you venture out of Charlottesville and go back home, if this is home, you go someplace where they have mounted police folks, right? So I ran into mounted police, of course, in New York, Baltimore, and Los Angeles. And they use them in New York. I almost got trampled in New York because I'm watching an action. There was only 2 LOs, and this is what I'm going to tell you. Do not LO alone. There are only 2 LOs. I'm watching the action. The mounted police are coming to my back. I don't see them. Do you think they're going to stop? No. My partner pushed me out of the way. Hence, if you are dealing with mounted police, one is watching the direction of the police on the horses, and one is watching the action. And that's it for animals. I'm sorry. And let me just see if this will actually work. I don't know if this is, it might. Pay attention quickly. Pay attention. Oh, we missed, there it is. Did y'all see that? See that takedown? Okay. Okay, so Andy is my colleague, who I LO with quite a bit. We also use strategic deployment of identity. Transgender, white male, black queer female, marching over the Manhattan Bridge. Protesters are on the roadway. We are having a conversation. The first conversation is, actually before we decide to march on the bridge, protesters take off. Andy and I turn to each other. Are we going to go with the protesters? That's the first thing. Yes. Second thing, are we going to go with the protesters on the roadway or on the walkway? Why do you think we asked that question? Because what happens if you actually walk on a roadway and it's illegal to walk on a roadway? It's a legal act, folks, right? There you go. So that's the second choice. Are we going to get on the roadway or use the bridge? At this point, we're going to use the bridge. Third question. Now, mind you, we're welcome to the vocal process. Please sit down there. Third question. In the event one of us has to speak to the police, the commanding officer, which one should speak to the commanding officer? Who do you think we decided? Why? Transgendered white male. So you think because he's white, because of his race, who else? Another rationale?
Well, how does he present? Does he pass as male?
So a question is, Andy sees himself as a man, and he dresses like a man, or what we perceive how men dress, right? Because remember, we're constructing all of our identities. So that's a good question, though.
Perceive him as male?
Maybe not. They might actually perceive him as someone who looks somewhat still feminine, but there's a question mark. Excellent question, though. So anyone else? So who do you think? So given that information, remember, folks, we don't got a lot of time. We're on the bridge. The folk are marching. So given that information, what's your decision? Him or me? It was the Eric Garner. I believe it's one of the Eric Garner protests.
Well,
We don't have that much time.
Maybe in that case, his whiteness would make him
We don't have that much time to make the decision.
like more.
Yes
less
or no?
threatening, I guess.
Who goes? Who? So so your response is what? Him or me?
I guess him. Yeah.
Andy? I saw another hand.
The sad is the way it is with police officers are going to empathize and maybe protect somebody who is white more so than somebody who is black. I mean, it's not how it's supposed to be, but it just is the way it is because how the whole racist structure and system is. Like they're hesitant to go be the whole issue you're protesting is police brutality against people of color, especially black people anyway. So if you send a black person to confront a police officer, they're going to be racist and commit brutality anyway because for the most part that is what they're taught to do. So if you send a white person, obviously it's a disconnect. Obviously the police system tend to privilege whiteness more in terms of their treatment. So you send that there and kind of also expose that in a sense, you know? Like,
Time out. So you may have come in late because I saw you walking, but the case was this. Andy is a transgendered white male. I am a queer black woman who doesn't fit what I call the cultural norms of beauty, right? And we had a conversation earlier about the way in which transgender individuals also experience a level of violence, right? So it's the intersection of race, gender identity, race and gender identity. So what I hear you all saying unanimously, I want to make this right, unanimously, is that we made the decision that Andy would be the individual that would approach police officers in the event that we have to interact with them. Because and this came out of because Andy and I decided that we were going to hop over the bridge onto the roadway. That's the piece I didn't tell you. We were going to actually, and we did. We hopped over the bridge to go onto the street, right? So I'm going to do this. You're quiet. Hi, I'm Dr. Humphries.
Hi, I'm Nicholas.
What did I just do? I am Dr. Humphries.
Started your education, your power of having a PhD.
So, folks, when I interact with police and when I interact primarily in white environments and when I interact primarily in male environments, I assert my social class because I'm signaling something. Whether we like it or not, my social class position as a my social class position may in some situations trump my racial gender, right, Dr. Humphries, even though it causes cognitive dissonance, right? So Andy and I decided that I would be the best person to approach the police officers, to assert my social class over a working class force, primarily of white and people of color. Working class force, right? So as LOs, you need to be aware that police officers are a working class force, and you all are not, in terms of where you're moving to, right? So I'm asserting, right, a position of power. So we made that decision in 2 minutes. Those are the kinds of decisions that you all, if you're in these kinds of situations and have to interact with police officers, possibly in these kind of contexts that you have to make, right? So this takedown of Andy, let's see. Does Andy look like a large-statured man? No. Andy, I think, is shorter than I am. So, notice the white shirts, commanding officers. Remember what I was talking about? Okay, so folks, great training, teaching tool. In terms of, did you see any other LOs with Andy? He's by himself. That's the first sort of question you want to ask yourself: where are the other LOs? Where's his partner, right? In terms of making that decision to enter into that context, right? Second question you want to ask is, should the police have taken Andy down in that manner? But you didn't hear at the beginning. They gave I believe they gave a dispersal order, right? They actually did give a dispersal order, right? Which means that you as LOs don't have protection against, being an LO does not protect you against not being arrested, not being assaulted, right? So understand that. And then the second part of this, folks, is what we talked about earlier. Andy was arrested, right? And part of the arrest process was the humiliation that he had to experience in them trying to identify which cell, right, he had to go to, right? So just be aware in terms of if there are folk, all of us have differences, you want to make sure that if you're working with folk who have these other vulnerabilities, you as the partner are aware of that, right? Because we don't want to make sure that we want to protect ourselves as best we can when we're doing this work. And let me end up here. Folks, that is it in terms of self-care. I would advise you all as a chapter. So I want to say this. As a social scientist, folks, I actually teach how to monitor and document the way police organize themselves, right? And the type of equipment that they use. And I use this as a teaching guide, right, for those folk who want to legal observe. Before you get onto the street, you understand the jurisdiction, right, of the police that you're interacting with. You want to understand their command structure, right? You want to understand their, may I borrow this? I got this offline. You want to understand their ranking system, right? Sergeants, lieutenants, captains with bars, majors, lieutenants. It's a paramilitary police structure. It's a military police structure. Military structure, right? So you want to actually know this before you hit the streets and perhaps have your chapter develop something like this that people can actually study and understand before they enter into the streets. So that's it, folks. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to you. I don't know if Ashley's on.
Okay. So we have Ashley Braxton, who is able to Skype in, actually, and she was really involved in observing and the Black Lives Matter movement and protests as a law student. So she's doing a lot of organizing, I think, as a 2L, but she's since graduated. So she was emailing me and saying that she didn't get the invite. So I was wondering if people, if we can make it optional, if people want to stay, we could try to Skype her in. If not, we might do like a different Skype sesh, like over a lunch or something. That way she could just talk about Black Lives Matter and kind of organizing as a student.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah. Also, if you want to do you mind doing like a Q&A?
Oh, no, I just wanted to be sure.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, Dr. Humphries.
Yeah.
I just was curious to know, what are like the boundaries of neutrality? Like if someone falls on the street, can you help them up? Like if someone appears to be like hurt or has been assaulted or something like that, like, you know, I guess like there's just like a level of like basic human compassion that I think would be okay, but like in this, is there?
So let me flip it.
Okay.
In that situation, there's two things. There's a difference between you're in a march and someone just falls, and of course you can pick them up. So the question you have to discern very quickly is there an arrest situation occurring where the person has fallen because the police has taken them down, and you're going to try to intervene, and you need to ask yourself, how are the police going to perceive you trying to intervene in the midst of an arrest? They're going to perceive you as interfering with an arrest, which is a misdemeanor. You guys help me out. Possibly a misdemeanor. Interference with an arrest. Thank you. Obstruction of justice. Thank you. Right? So in that context, I would advise you not to try to intervene. Right? But you're going to have to, you guys, when you're in the street, only you can make that determination. And that's what, I'm going to say that is almost with a lot of the situations that I've been in when there's my compassion of seeing something happening in this context, and then realizing I could possibly be, right, charged. Yeah.
So with the gloves and the dogs and like the T formation, it seems like those are like escalating situations. Is there like a protocol or like a 3-step thing like you do like before like stuff happens?
I want to say it's almost intuition, right? So it's a thin line between, yes, I can read when police, I believe there's a possibility of police escalation. It was the slide where I said you've got to learn how to read the tone and tenor, which means you guys got to become really astute at reading body language, nonverbal body language, as well as, perfect example, not only just body language, but you will see the escalation of police, right? The motorcycle squad will come up. The terrorist division will come out. For example, in New York City, folks, I think we have like 15-something units, and what I mean by that is you have the disorderly conduct unit. You can look this up and find out what they do. The disorderly conduct unit, the terrorist unit, the tower unit, and they're the ones who are specifically responsible for videotaping and collecting information of activists, and they have beige pants and blue tops, and they carry video cameras, right? So when you start seeing some of these units, as Paul has taught me, the gentleman who I pointed out, Paul has taught me to literally read who the commander is as we move through the streets of New York. You will see in Harlem all those units I just described, but as we go down, walk down and get to about 80th Assumption Street, which is Upper East Side, which is wealthy, all of a sudden some units disappear, other units come on, and then when we get to Midtown, we don't see the terrorist units anymore, right? And then by the time we get to the South, like it's totally different. So yes, depending on who they perceive, which populations might be more dangerous, you might see more certain types of units, which means you need to determine, right, oh, this might be a situation, right? Or if you're already at a scene and you see other escalation of police coming in, i.e. the orange nets, right? You all know what the orange nets are, right? So we're talking about commanding and controlling of people. Orange nets, you'll see an officer literally carrying this rolled up net that's orange that can be pulled out at about 100-something feet and literally can do sweeps. You're coming out of, it's a way to control a crowd, right? So you're coming out, you're not even part of the protest, but you're coming out of the subway and you get caught up in a sweep. So in the RN 24 protests that occurred, people who were not even part of the protest got swept up So as an LO, you want to first ask, does anybody, if you don't see an orange net, you might say, hey, so-and-so in the back of the march or whatever, do you see an orange net? And how do you want to communicate that through signal? You see an orange net. And they'll let you know. If it pops into the scene, that might signal to you there's a possibility they might be getting ready for a sweep, right? So some of it is objective information that you're getting in, and then some of it, I'll be very honest with you, is a gut feeling that something's about to go down. I don't know what they use here, so you all need to, once again, in terms of doing your homework, what is the type of equipment that the local police use? Everything from just their standard, what they call a standard equipment, baton, arms, and then the context of controlling protests, what new legislation have they ushered in? So for example, in New York City, I think it was last year, the city council allocated so many millions of dollars or hundred thousands of dollars to equip this new unit that's called the Strategic Response Unit. You guys can look it up. And the Strategic Response Unit are equipped with long-range rifles, right? They're much more aggressive in the street. I've had to deal with them. They will push you. They are that group that will push you, right? But they are specifically trained to deal with terrorists. And when the announcement came out, the commissioner at the time, Bratton, said this group was to deal with terrorists and Black Lives Matter protests. He put it in the same, right, context, right? So we know, and even though he's backed down with that, we know that this unit now is out there specifically to suppress and instill fear, right, around Black Lives Matter protesters. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, I just kind of, as kind of a follow-up to that, since you've been doing legal observing for long before kind of the Black Lives Matter kind of protests started, I was wondering if you could talk about how, if at all, these protests are different, or the police are approaching it differently, or if you notice any changes because of the nature of the Black Lives Matter movement.
I would say that, yes, I have noticed a change in terms of, well, one is, I just shared with you that prior to last year, we didn't have a strategic response unit that was specifically designated to address the Black Lives Matter movement, and in particular, the size of the protests, right? But then also particular to do surveillance and suppression, right? And engage in what we all know as psychological ops, right? And collect that information, and literally a database on the activists, which they share nationally, right? Because we know the activists travel from state to state, right, or different locales. Police also have databases they share. When an activist shows up at one site, they have the database, and they have facial recognition data, facial recognition technology, hence the stingrays that I shared with you earlier. There's stingrays that can jam your phones and stuff, but they also have facial recognition technology, which I ran into in Los Angeles and took a photo of. So if you're in this database, you'll see that there's a truck out there, at least in LA, there's a truck out there with a camera. Scans your face, goes through a database, and identifies who you are, right? So yes, we see that kind of the use of technology in the suppression of Black Lives Matter protests. I'm gonna say, I have never been on a protest march that was 10 hours long. The longest protest march I was on prior to the Michael Brown killing and protests, max 3 hours, max, if that. Post Michael Brown, we're talking 9, 12, 16 hours, right? And so there's a shift in the length and duration of protests. There's a shift in the what do I want to call it? The tactics that police use to kind of try to suppress that. As the protesters develop new and creative ways to circumvent the police, like the split off, I'll describe it. So we're literally running in the streets with protesters. Some go that way, some go that way. The police is a paramilitary organization. What can't they do? It's a command control. What can't they do? They can't adapt because they're dealing with a cellular, protesters are cellular structures or network structures, right? Police, you have to call in, right? So I think that they are trying to figure out ways right? I think it's the use of more military-grade weapons because they just can't break command and start running like that. Matter of fact, even the question you might want to ask is, how has it impacted LOs, and what kind of training do we need in order to adapt to the new times? We haven't had that conversation. Hence, folks, I don't know if you noticed, you're going to be out there with the green hat. You're standing in front of police officers in Cavalier gear. Have you thought about perhaps that we might need something for protection other than just I have, because I've been in that environment. Have you thought about that perhaps we need better training around, if medics aren't out there, how do we, right, be prepared to provide first aid in the event that someone is injured? How do we really, I mean, I'm like talking about cognitive awareness and implicit bias. How do we really prepare people to deal with the reactivity of their amygdala, specifically in confronting the increased presence of militarized police? You guys, I don't know how many of you have actually really been in the presence of militarized police. It's very different, unless you've traveled outside the US, perhaps, like Palestine, other countries, right? So these are some of the conversations I've had privately with people, but I'm talking about on an organizational level. Even you guys, you kind of really want to take this seriously about not just how the police have responded, but how are we really, really trained to respond to this? Yes?
Have you seen any, have you seen any improvement since you guys have been doing this? Like, has there been any, like, forward steps?
In terms of what? Be very
in terms of the protests, have they produced positive outcomes?
So let me reframe your question. With the presence of LOs in the streets, have the police changed the way in which they attempt to intimidate protesters or arrest protesters? Yes. Two examples. New York City folks, NYPD knows who LOs are. They know the National Lawyers Guild. The National Lawyers Guild has sued them, has filed a motion, and I guess sued them using sound cannons. So Elena Cohen and Gideon Oliver, who are attorneys, NLG attorneys, sued the NYPD, and they were able to, you guys help me out, get an injunction against the use of LRAD, because we do not know the actual effects of LRAD on our bodies. But more importantly, how many of you all study international law, human rights law? What conventions have we signed? Let me pose it as a question. The U.S. has signed on to various conventions about the non-use of military-grade weapons on domestic populations. In the event they violate that treaty, what are the repercussions? Speak up.
Could be economic sanctions or, I guess, other sort of like removal.
Oh man. So the question is, we've signed on to international treaties that we're supposed to abide by, that in the event we violate them, there's another body, right, oversight mechanism, right, that citizens and non-citizens can use, right, to bring it to the international court.
Yeah, but the U.S. doesn't recognize jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. They kind of have to agree to be heard in front of it.
Okay. Does that mean that we stop using that? No.
Yeah.
So, example, Stan Willis, National Conference of Black Lawyers attorney, filed suit against the Chicago Police Department for their torture chambers that they used for the past 15, 20 years where they tortured black youth and men. He took that to the United Nations, right, and basically was able to apply, I should say, pressure, right, on a local jurisdiction to basically enact reparations. That is an example of how you can use different legal instruments, right, in treaties. Two, having a legal observer presence police know who we are. They know we're watching, right? And so they're going to possibly be less, forceful, right, in violating this. In Baltimore, there was no legal observer presence, no knowledge of legal observers. We trained 300-something, 400-something people, put them on the streets. Do you realize now that the Baltimore police, that the politicians, that people now know that there are a body of legal observers that get deployed, right, and protests, and that in fact will, be followed up with suits? So yes, you can literally change, and that's what's going, you missed it earlier, folks. So the work that I'm involved in is that I train legal observers, but I also build mass defense systems, and that is you need a structure in order to actually be able to implement this entire process. So that's what I do in black communities around the country. I organize with black attorneys and communities and building that infrastructure to do that. We've changed the culture, right? In terms of, I heard someone use the term, they want to work with communities so that they can build empowerment. This is one way to do it, right? So it's very similar to Cop Watch, right? Cop Watch, which was established by, I'd say, the progenitors, the Black Panther Party in Oakland, right? You guys know about that history. So they're like the originators of Cop Watch, right? So LOs is just it's a variation of that kind of using our constitutional rights and citizen power to be an oversight, right, over these different bodies. Yeah.
You mentioned the different ways that the police are adapting, so to speak, to suppress a lot of these movements and a lot of these protests. Because social media has been like a really big part of just the Black Lives Matter movement, from the whole marches for Trayvon Martin, Ferguson, obviously, social media, Twitter, everything set it off. But on the same report, police are also adapting their mechanisms to monitor those forums in terms of protests, and not only that, information about legal observers, where legal observers are located, how legal observers can get access to these protests, in terms of like where the protests are, how, the strategies of said protests. How, and you may have brought this up earlier, but how would like you as a legal observer, trainer of legal observers adapt to that? Like what are the ways can you circumvent like police surveillance of social media entities in terms of getting that information out about your services, like about, getting information out to the protesters about where legal observers are at so they could access or be near legal observers in a protest just in case like police come out with like SWAT and like tear gas and everything.
Okay, so a couple things, which is a very excellent question. And so look, normally activists do not disclose to legal observers what their tactics are for obvious reasons. And I don't necessarily want to know what the activist tactics are for obvious reasons. In the event that the police, in the event that I end up in a situation where I have to like testify, right? So that's the first thing. That doesn't mean that there aren't LOs clearly who have very close relationships with the activist organizations or may not even be, or actually be part of those organizations and know that, right? And they also are monitoring social media. So it's one of these thin lines between, I think you can state policy like the LA chapter does that, we're not supposed to be in on activist negotiations. We're not supposed to be in on any kind of meetings with activists where they're talking about tactics. But I can tell you, truthfully, I've been in those meetings because I've been asked to come specifically to talk to them about what you just asked, right? Now, I just violated policy, but I'm just sharing with you that's real, right? So it's almost like it's an unspoken, we know that we do this, but we still have a policy, right? How do we circumvent like this technology? I would have to refer you to the people that I know who are specialists in this, right? And so I think it's the Los Angeles Stop Police Spying Coalition, LAPD Stop Police Spying Coalition. Google them. They are like the nation experts. What is his name? I've forgotten his name. But if you want to understand how communities are fighting back against police surveillance, that's one organization. And you can actually, and I've forgotten his name. You can actually say that I like referred you to him. Those are the people who are doing that kind of work, that kind of thinking around circumventing various types of surveillance. I use it to the extent of, since I'm on the streets and I'm out there, I take pictures of all this technology that I see out there, and then I give it to them and I say, what is this, right? So when I was in LA, I was at a BLM LA Occupy City Hall event. I saw the white truck. I knew that it was a camera because I'm a photographer, so I saw the eye, I took a picture of it, sent it to him. I also called ACLU, right? Because ACLU is a great resource, right? And so if you call their surveillance, you know, the division that does that work around surveilling police and violation of our rights, send it to him, and they got on it. They were trying to figure out, what is this? No one could tell me what it was. We don't even know what some of that technology is, right? Because it's not public. So the question that some of you legal scholars, I'm gonna say you all legal scholars, should be asking is, this technology the police has to surveil citizens and non-citizens, that they're not giving us information for how they're using it, is that legal? Because we have no way, we can't, unless something happens, what did they tell me? Unless we can't, the way it's structured, folks, is that we can't get that information. Right, so it comes down to you guys who are like the legal scholars around, is it violating some constitutional right? Because I can't just sequester it because I took a picture of this technology and want to know what it is in terms of its surveilling activists. So I can't, you know, I can't offer you, I'm sorry, I can't offer you any more sort of concrete sort of examples of how to circumvent police technology, except to the extent that we become more knowledgeable about the technologies they're using. But if it's not accessible what they're using, how do we know what they're using, right? So how do we get that? And then coming up with these legal ways to then, I guess, adjudicate against it, to release that information. But I would also speak to, be honest with you, some of the activists on the ground who are savvy, who are like not in these silos, and maybe they're interacting with like Palestinian activists who have more experience in these areas, in terms of how to still organize and get around that. I know that when, I think it was Ferguson, some Palestinian groups sent information to Black Lives Matter folk, or folk who are on the ground in Ferguson, in terms of, this is how you protect yourself against tear gas, because they deal with it all the time, right? And so they were sharing information. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's the best I can do.
Okay, I don't want to end this conversation, but if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to come up. But I also want to give you a chance to answer some. I know it's gotten a little bit late. So please, before you go, make sure you sign in on the sign-in sheet, grab stickers, some other know your rights information, some disorientation booklets, grab pizza, please, if you still want to. And if you have any questions, please come up and feel free to talk to Dr. Humphries. And we all please thank her.